Justin Trudeau may come home from China empty-handed. Will this be yet another abject failure by the Canadian government to secure a trade deal they had wanted and promised? Maybe given our prior trade negotiations, Canadians should have expected failure. After all, our International Trade Minister Chrystia Freeland famously broke down in tears when trade negotiations stalled with the European Union. And now NAFTA negotiations are going very poorly by all accounts from both sides of the border. You see, Trudeau had intended to enlist China as a buffer with the United States and President Trump during these NAFTA negotiations. But what is becoming increasingly clear, even within Canada's media party, who usually can't help but fawn over everything Justin Trudeau has done the past 2 years, is just how inept these Trudeau Liberals are at negotiating trade deals. Upon arriving in Beijing, one thing was abundantly clear. The Liberals expected a trade deal, or at the very least, serious progress towards one. Remember, we're only mere weeks removed from the visit of President Trump to China, but both the receptions and the results have been polar opposites. As we reported, Trump left China with $250 billion in trade deals, including over $40 billion in a massive LNG deal for Alaska. And he secured the release of those 3 knucklehead UCLA basketball stars who were facing jail time for shoplifting. As for Trudeau, well, to be fair, the trip isn't over just yet, but the headlines from the first 2 days have been just awful. And thus far, no deal and no Canadian prisoners released either. John Ivison of the National Post wrote on Monday that the Chinese ambushed Trudeau on trade talks as the Liberals arrived believing China had already agreed to their progressive trade agenda and were willing to make concessions on the environment, labor rights, and even human rights. Well, not so fast apparently, as Trudeau's meeting with Chinese Premier Li Keqiang did not go well, and according to Ivison, quote, Trudeau emerged to give his final statement looking like the boy who expected a bike for Christmas and instead got a pair of plain socks, unquote. And nothing can possibly disappoint Justin Trudeau more than plain socks. Ivison went on to report the Canadian photographers, even the Prime Minister's personal photographer, were regularly blocked from taking photos of the event by Chinese security. Then on Tuesday, as Trudeau met with President Xi Jinping, it appeared maybe Justin Trudeau had brought Canada closer to a deal, as Ivison reports the on-again, off-again deal was almost on again before it fell apart. Ivison writes, quote, there are 3 golden rules to doing business in this country. You never try to impose your own values, you never interpret acknowledgement during a meeting as agreement, and you don't assume that people in that meeting have the authority to strike a deal. Ottawa seems to have broken all 3 rules, unquote. Well, it appears our globalist Prime Minister forgot there is still quite a nationalist streak in China. And they're not just going to play by our rules because we want them to or because we've been friendly as a nation, say not opposing major acquisitions of Canadian companies by Chinese firms, as we've seen since Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister. But just for a moment, let's just quickly compare the approach of Justin Trudeau in Canada to that of President Trump and his U.S. administration. Trump values a personal relationship and friendship with President Xi. And right now it doesn't appear Justin Trudeau has that same kind of friendship. Trump spent decades as a fierce critic of China. And so it's not a stretch to see that they are paying him respect because of that tough talk over all those years. And while it's not an easy comparison to make between Canada and the United States, as our southern neighbors have far more influence and power over China than we will ever have, but remember the way the Chinese received President Obama? Doesn't that remind you of the way they treat Justin Trudeau? If you recall Obama's 2016 visit to China, he was forced by the Chinese to exit Air Force One on the runway, well, as The Guardian put it, from the ass of the plane. And while Trudeau's sit-down with Premier Li was not quite as humiliating, the way the Chinese ambushed him when he assumed that he had already had a deal to be made and it was there for the taking, well, those are the same intentional tactics they used with President Obama. So barring a last-minute deal, should Trudeau and the Liberals return empty-handed to Canada, well, the pressure will be on to come to a deal on NAFTA. But the Trump administration will then know they have Canada between a rock and a hard place with no leverage without a deal with China. And now that Trudeau is less than 2 years from re-election, and without any major trade wins or a strong economy that reflects the positive movement we've seen south of the border under Donald Trump, well, Canada's Liberals might find themselves in a lot of trouble. For the Rebel.Media, I'm Christopher Wilson. You know, we keep a close eye on China and the relationship with the West, so make sure you click subscribe on our YouTube page.